Warhammer The Horus Heresy, Eidolon The Auric Hammer by Mark Collins. Chapter 20. Lessons from the Ashes. The warp's touch and the dying rift had wormed their way down into the flesh of the world, rendering the walls smooth and flowing like flash-frozen water. Eidolon blinked away the after-images of places that no longer existed, a tapestry wrought from memory and now swept aside by martial prowess and the whim of a god. He breathed in the stink of the pit and the indelible taste of reality once more. He braced a hand against his armor. He was flesh again, clad in his plate, carrying his weapon. He did not feel an absence in his soul, merely strength, power. When he moved, it was in perfect concert with his will. Eidolon laughed quietly to himself and cast his eye about him, seeking the source of an echoing applause. Malachus and Vociferon had fallen to their knees amidst the calumny. One of Malachus's clawed gauntlets was braced against Vociferon's wounded shoulder plate. Their chests heaved with exaggerated effort as the armor translated their exhaustion. Plegua stood over them, weapon still readied, poised for whatever convulsion of violence greeted them next. Von Calder knelt nearby, tending to a brother's wounds. The Astartes was pale, face streaked with blood from his eyes and nose, silent, weakened, perhaps even dying. Eidolon forced himself forwards, staggering as his strength ebbed. He pulled Malachus up, dislodging him from his fellow legionary.
"You are a weak-willed fool,"
Eidolon said at last. Malachus spat to one side, his acid saliva streaked with blood.
"You wound me, lord."
Eidolon's backhand caught him by surprise, bowling him over into the ashes. He rolled, sprawling over a mutilated corpse in purple and white. His face had been gnawed off, though whether by the Neverborn or its fellow warriors of the Third, Eidolon could not tell. Malachus forced himself back up and ignited his claws, standing and panting before the Lord Commander Primus as others gathered around him. Eidolon ducked low and pinned Malachus to the ground by the throat. He braced himself about the captain's legs, forcing him down and into the blood and ruin of their dead. Gloria Eterna was in his hand again, already ignited. Lightning danced between the active field and the madman's flesh, sizzling with a satisfying hiss of cooking meat.
"Once you embraced this pain,"
Eidolon snarled. He pushed harder. One of the barbed studs in Malachus's face ceased quivering and began to run, leaving a small trail of molten metal burning down his cheek. The captain's nerves finally overloaded, and he began to scream. The weapon started to obliterate his face, moment by moment, micron by micron. A wet pop resounded as one of Malachus's eyes burst, weeping blood and humour. He mewed and writhed piteously, his armoured bulk slamming against the ground of the great command hall. "My lord." Eidolon snapped around and glared at the speaker. His rage faded for a moment, replaced by surprise as he realised who had addressed him. Vociferon was still on his knees. His hair matted to his head with sweat, as though the climb had been a true test of strength. His sword lay before him, the flawless sabre beautiful amidst the horror of the chamber, like a memory of an idealized age. "Spare him, lord."
"Spare him?"
Eidolon surged up, swinging the hammer about one-handed, pointing it at Vociferon accusingly.
"Your petty rival. A man who could not hold himself together long enough for a simple prosecution."
He leant down, coming face to face with Vociferon. The swordsman's flawless demeanour had cracked, and whatever madness he had been struggling to keep sequestered had poured out. His hair was ragged and blood-smeared where he had torn at it. Long gouges marked his cheeks where he had clawed at the skin. Trophies had been pinned or nailed to his armour, cut free from the living and the dead alike.
"We will need every blade at Terra, Lord Commander Primus,"
Vociferon said, and shook his head.
"I despise him, but none of us were immune to the powers unleashed here. No matter what we pretend to be, we have all failed. If the Phoenician wished him dead, he would have struck him down himself."
The swordsman paused.
"If he is to die, then let him die upon Terra's soil. Let him lay down his life before the walls of the palace. There, at least, he will be some use."
"Mercy!" Malachus mewed from the ground. He had flipped over and forced himself onto all fours, hunched forward like an ailing canid. Drool and vomit dribbled from between his lips as he heaved and retched in agony. Eidolon's torment had robbed him of the joy that pain brought. Palsy swept him as he tried to rise unsteadily to his feet. He skidded and slipped on the entrail-slickened ground, bracing himself with his outstretched arms.
I have served, Lord. I can be of service again. I ask only for the chance.
Eidolon looked down at him for a long moment. He turned and scanned the crowd. So few of the third millennial were gathered, cleaving to their makeshift warbands and shifting allegiances. Cathan awed of the Ravager cadre, his shaven scalp carved with flowing symbols of a dead language. Caradar Fennec, with his oiled locks and fierce eyes, lips constantly moving in a relentless recitation of poetry. And then he saw Till Plegwer, no longer lost to the rapture of the song. His eyes were fixed on Eidolon's. Holding his gaze with his half-visage, the scrimshawed skull of half his face grinned in hollow longing at him, like a memento mori come to life. Beside him, almost in contrast, was the eternally youthful face of Von Calder, his smooth cheeks reddened by the struggle. Eidolon hesitated. He stepped forwards, hammer still raised, and looked down at Malachus in judgment. How many lords and masters had he observed in the same situation? A noble standing sentinel over his lesser, nestled amidst the frozen forests of Europa, content to trade a child for security or for favour. A Primarch doling out his affections and attentions with an even hand, even as he grew miserly with his trust, fixated on a star he could never attain. A Lord Commander, the fate of thousands trickling through his fingers, vying for power and position amongst rivals, caught in the perpetual struggle of court politics and advancement.
What would I be without that struggle? The Crucible shaped me into this, one absent father, or the one who made me as I am, time and again, in victory and defeat, through life and death.
He closed his eyes, mocking laughter echoed in the darkness. The twisted mirror of his own poisoned mirth burbled through the lips of the shattered king.
The judgment of our betters, the poison of mercy.
Eidolon opened his eyes. He reached out his free hand. Malachus looked up at him, surprise writ across his face.
Rise,
Eidolon said. Someone began to applaud. He was not sure who. Eidolon turned and surveyed the tight confines of the pit. Now that the rift had burned itself out, the other warriors had spread out around the edges of it. Eidolon stood at its centre, turning his gaze from one warrior to the next, seeking whoever was clapping, eager to cease the mockery. None of them were moving. Eidolon turned. The sound rang strangely in the warp-worn space. Nightmares and echoes clung to every surface, resounding where they should die, taking form like dancing witchfire. Light and shadow scrabbled along the obsidian-bladed edges of the pit, flickering and pulsing as though stirred by some great wind. He followed the sound to its source, and his breath caught in his throat. The armoured figure was tall and lithe. The warplate that clung to him had been forged with superlative skill, work that spoke of the long toil of master craftsmen, the apex of humanity's artificers. White hair cascaded down his shoulders like an avalanche of purest snowfall. His skin was alabaster, yet it shone from within like a captive star. His eyes were cruel and beautiful, and sparked with a seductive madness. Worlds had fallen into those eyes, and torn themselves apart for but the smallest fragment of his regard. He was art itself, a painting or sculpture wrought by a savant and given life. Like the Galicians of ancient myth, yet he burned with a vitality. Biology and spirituality had intersected perfectly for him to spring, fully formed from some mortal godhead. Fulgrim, the Phoenician himself, looked down upon Eidolon and ceased his applause. "My son," he breathed, the merest effort utterly melodic. There was venom layered there with the saccharine tones. Eidolon forced himself up, teeth gritted. There was pain, yes, but pain was his dear companion now. It sang in his blood, and pirouetted in his soul. Without his pain, he had thought he was nothing. Now he had passed through the fire, and he knew better. He knew his own truth.
"Father,"
Eidolon said. He could barely look at Fulgrim. After images stalked the Primarch as he moved, heat haze dogging his every step. Sometimes he was the great illuminator, as he had always been, and yet other times the serpent of the apocalypse, body dragging itself forwards with inexorable longing, slouching towards inevitability, ever hungry and insatiable, too many arms moving in impossible rhythms, each one carrying a blade from another dead culture. He blinked away the demonic vision and regarded his father as he had been in true life. "You surprise me, Eidolon. I did not expect you to take so readily to the game."
The game?
Eidolon almost laughed. He strode towards his father and showed no fear. The immaterial afterbirth faded from around the Lord Commander Primus, and he stood to his full height. His fingers closed and opened, and he felt new strength there, power born of sacrifice. "It is all a game, my son. All of it. It ever has been. Since before this war began. We have been pieces upon the board." Fulgrim drew a long, straight blade from a human leather scabbard and examined the edge of it, thoughtfully and longingly. "Some of us have become players in our time, of course. I was not content to watch from the sidelines while the war burned on and on. I have to test my sons to the best of their ability. Perhaps Julius will be next."
"You did this?"
Eidolon said, aghast. Fulgrim looked at him as though he were an idiot, a flash of hatred colouring his gaze. Once again, Eidolon saw the blade swing for his throat, as though it were poised to recur. "No, Eidolon, your broken soul sought you out alone, set a trap in the heart of your old pride, and tried to wear your skin as a fine new armour all by itself. Of course I did." The demon Primarch laughed and slid forward, reaching out with the tip of the blade. He pressed it just below Eidolon's throat. The War Master's plans take time. Waiting is a tedious conceit. I made my own amusement. It was a paltry thing to snatch it from the warp and bend it to my will. Draw it here to a place resonant in your soul and memory. Such fun.
"All this just to keep you from becoming bored?"
Eidolon shook his head.
"A waste. I hope you're pleased with yourself."
"Sometimes," Fulgrim admitted. "I even impress myself. More and more since Idris. New gifts and new glories. Yet crafting this diversion was most entertaining, sweet Eidolon."
"And what do you want from me, father? Congratulations for a game well played."
"Perhaps I simply wish to see you made whole, or at the very least rendered interesting." Fulgrim glanced at the small knot of warriors, hunched beneath the clipped edges of the pit. Bloody runoff had begun to drizzle down from above in a gory waterfall. "Or wish to see if the third millennial were truly in good hands. You do so enjoy thinking of yourself as my successor." The Primarch walked, and yet Eidolon heard the scraping of scales against stone. The mutilated reality in which the Primarch's snake body writhed across the ground, insinuating itself bit by bit.
"You are a fool,"
Eidolon said finally. The Primarch rippled with joyous cackling, the sound pouring from him in an echoing wave. "Oh, a fool, is it? Perhaps I carved away your head too soon, Eidolon. I should have kept you at my side, as a naismith, as my brother maintained. As though you would ever second-guess anything I ever said." One immaculate gauntlet rose and tapped against his lower lip thoughtfully. "That being said, you questioning me is why I took your head in the first place."
"Sorry to disappoint you,"
he snarled through gritted teeth. "Now that you never fail at."
"I am made in your image,"
Eidolon said.
"shaped by your teachings and your failings."
"Ah, of course. You blame me for your mistakes." The others had risen and gathered around them as they spoke, keeping a respectful distance. Eidolon imagined there were few who would dare the Primarch's wrath as he was now. "I offered you a rare gift, Eidolon. An opportunity to be made whole and to seize greatness." The Primarch hooked a taloned finger into the skin of Eidolon's face and dragged it through his flesh. Eidolon hissed at the sudden rush of pleasure and pain, the sensation of blood dappling down his cheek and arm and shoulder. He leant into it. He would not be humbled. He forced his face against the bladed digit and let it bite. Eidolon could feel it pushing deeper, scraping against the bone. Pain could be overcome in the pursuit of perfection. That was what he had always believed and followed.
I have greatness enough already,
Eidolon said. The blade pressed in at his throat and he ignored it. He reached up and seized Fulgrim's wrist. Eidolon felt the power within his flesh, the barely contained fury of the immaterium. It called to him with all the seductive promise that his broken soul had offered, whispering the same honeyed promises. Fulgrim was no different to any other child of the warp. All their power was poisoned. There was strength in being mortal. He pulled Fulgrim's arm away and watched that perfect gaze widen. Shock and admiration flickered across the Primarch's flawless features before settling into a bemused sneer. "Perhaps you do, my son." Fulgrim spread his arms, and a light mewling escaped his lips as he shook Eidolon's grip free. He stretched, and his flesh and armor began to run and shift like clay. That captive light bled out of him, weeping through his transforming skin. Fulgrim reared up as his abdomen distended and more arms forced their way through skin and ceramite, clawing at the air. His tail whipped about behind him before it coiled forward, winding around Eidolon as the demon Primarch drew ever nearer. His eyes were pools of black fire where dying stars wheeled and collided. Fulgrim's beauty was an atrocity in itself. It was a horror shaped into art. He was the most beautiful and terrible thing Eidolon had ever gazed upon. Even more so than upon Idris. Perhaps more than at the dark triumph of Ulanor. Fulgrim now truly inhabited his apotheosis. "Strength is not enough, Lord Commander." Fulgrim whispered. He squeezed. The slightest flex or contraction, and Eidolon knew his legs would break. "Not alone. We will not win the wars to come simply by being the strongest. Our wars will be won because we are better. We shall make war in such glory and splendor that it shall burn to simply look upon us. Upon Terra's soil we shall be reborn in truth. The Emperor's children shall come home at last, tear him from his tower, and break him underfoot."
Yet we squander our resources.
"No, Eidolon. I spend the lives of my legion as I see fit. What are a few more bodies in the ground when you are, as a whole, sharper now than you were before?" Two of Fulgrim's arms grasped Eidolon by the arms, and another two braced against his breastplate. "You feel it, do you not? Rising from the ashes of your soul and taking wing? I have given that gift to you, my son. New strength and determination."
You think this is a gift? You would have made me into some mere thing of the warp, your lesser and your shadow, had I chosen another path.
Fulgrim smirked. "Oh, I cared not which side triumphed. Be you bound by flesh, or ascendant in spirit. It would have brought me much amusement."
All the more reason for me to set my own fate. If our fathers are uncaring, all the better to spite them.
"You always were a contrary child," Fulgrim tutted. The demon Primarch shook his head, and his black eyes flared suddenly with disappointed anger. "Have I cultivated too much wasted potential? Sons who never lived up to my expectations? Perhaps I should have tried harder to shepherd you all to your destinies, or simply skinned more of you alive and made my throne from your bones, Eidolon shook his head.
Your capriciousness did not leave you when you ascended, father. No, far from it. Your mercurial paranoia and desperation for approval have only accelerated, fueled and fattened by the warp. It has seeped into your heart and swelled the gardens of your own failings. Crops of venal pettiness and fickle madness, filled to bursting by the sea of souls.
The mania passed as readily as it had come. One of Fulgrim's hand drifted up to stroke along Eidolon's unmarred cheek. He wore no gauntlets, but the passage of the clawed fingers left lines of fire down Eidolon's skin, as potent as a power-fielded claw. Rippling electrostatic aftershocks trickled through his flesh, setting the nerves ablaze and making his face twitch and tick. Perhaps. Eidolon forced the words out.
We are all the products of fathers who cared too little until it was too late.
Fulgrim's hand snapped up and seized Eidolon's hair, yanking his head back with such fury that vertebrae ground against one another. Eidolon hissed with pain. The Primarch didn't flinch, instead leaning closer to savor the discharge of power. Impressive. he whispered, so close that only Eidolon could hear him. The Lord Commander Primus's eyes snapped from side to side, trying to look anywhere but at the burning incarnation of the Dark Prince's might. All around them, the third millennial had closed in. None knew what to do. Weapons were held ready, but to what end? He could see the conflict warring within them. Slaves to two masters, some of the warriors had their eyes locked onto the floor, unable or unwilling to regard Fulgrim in his true form. "Look at me! Look at me!" The Primarch snapped as he shook Eidolon. Eidolon's eyes focused back upon him. A forked purple tongue slid between Fulgrim's lips. "Excellent. You are capable of listening, then. Yet so disobedient and willful. You've never forgiven me, have you?" "Don't deny it," Fulgrim snarled. "I have given you such gifts, Eidolon, such opportunities. Why do you spurn me? You could not escape me. I bear a father's love and a father's failings. I do not deny this, but I will not suffer your mewling disdain. Not here, not now. Terror is before us. Terror. There will be no greater conflict, no truer moment nor opportunity than when we have the Throne Lord's throat beneath our boot. My father's precious palace laid bare and broken. Imagine the opportunity there, to see him brought low and broken." "I will be there," Eidolon panted as he kicked out. Fulgrim lifted him bodily and let the blows rain against his breastplate and undulating flesh. The coils tightened and Fulgrim grinned. "If I allow it," he sneered. "If you forgive me, I took your life and I had Fabius give it back. I was the lash and the rod at your back. And now look at you, my son. You held a third of the Legion to task. You ran down the Khan and his savages. You were the first to come to me at Ullanor when I called upon my sons. Now all I ask is that you forgive and serve."
"You killed me!"
Eidolon snapped. His voice boomed off the unnaturally smooth walls and staggered the gathering knot of warriors. Fulgrim barely flinched. The Primarch's baleful radiance flared. The unclean light caught upon the stray pools of blood, making the crimson fluid writhe with gaudy illumination. Shapes moved within them, faces pressing up as though against window glass. Impossible breath fogged the veil between worlds, taunted forth by their master, drawn so very close to be his handmaids or confidants. Eidolon tasted the stink of the Phoenician, drank it in, through his nose and mouth, every last pore opening to absorb the pheromone reek of the demigod. In their mortal existence, even the least of the Primarchs had possessed a power that could unman all but the strongest of warriors. Often strength of will had been all that saved a man from being reduced to a babbling imbecile. Fulgrim had swollen with venomous charisma. It radiated from him in an almost physical wave. It would have driven Eidolon away had he not been held in place, pinned like a specimen, burning beneath the lamplight of his father's attention and affection.
"You killed me,"
Eidolon repeated, his voice low and quaking.
"On a whim. For nothing."
"I had you brought back."
"As an afterthought. Yet more of your fickleness and vanity."
Eidolon's throat pulsed with sympathetic anger, and he reached up, seizing hold of Fulgrim's grasping arms and forcing them back. He dropped, hitting the ground, almost going to his knees. Eidolon surged up as his throat aligned and dilated. The scream erupted from him, forced out and hurled against his master. It was near volcanic in its fury, a pyroclastic body blow that drove the Primarch back. Flesh struck stone with a wet, hissing slap. The demon's tail flailed through the air even as his torso slid back upright, leaving an acid smear like a slug's trail behind him.
"I am not your slave or your puppet,"
Eidolon snarled. His hand closed around the discarded haft of Gloria Eterna and swept the weapon up. It swung in a hissing arc of discharged lightning, trailing it like the tails of a comet. Fulgrim slithered out of the way, his body going flat against the ground as the hammer slammed into the stonework, gouging a fresh crater. "And look at you now, a man of your own will, a soldier of intent." Fulgrim ducked and dodged a second and third attack, and then brought his hands up, swords shimmering into being, their gilded edges catching the next strike and turning it aside. A storm of slashes rained down upon Eidolon, an intricate pattern of blows that each missed him, pinning him between a web of sword blades, trapping him against the wall and the ground. The blades flexed barely a micron, and Eidolon hissed. Pain saturated him till his nerves sang and blood ran from the barely perceptible wounds in his plate and flesh. "You cannot imagine," Fulgrim said, and drew himself closer still, close enough that Eidolon could smell the sugar and cyanide odor of his breath. "I could be a beautiful death if you so desire. At my hand, you could cross that veil once more and be mere prey for all those who wait beyond. My beloved Nakari is there, and my master's favoured handmaiden. All those who serve the will and want of the Dark Prince himself would have their turn with you, my sweet Eidolon. What will your answer be?" One of the swords, a silver blade with its hilt entwined with carved, writhing bodies, evaporated in a hiss of opiate smoke. Fulgrim's clawed hand shot forward and seized Eidolon's chin, forcing him to look directly into the piteous eyes. He could see the madness and desperation screaming there, flickering around the barest memory of the man Fulgrim had been, before the monstrosity of his vice and ego had subsumed him forever.
"I will lead my men, as I always have,"
Eidolon said at last.
"I will lead them to terror itself, and I will do it for myself alone, for the glory that is due to me."
Now, was that so difficult? Fulgrim laughed. He flung his many arms wide, each one poised at a different angle. The ancient avatar of divinity given new life and potency. "Once perhaps I might have kept you alive merely because it pleased me, Eidolon, but you have wrought a wonder here, that much is true." Fulgrim spun about and turned his attention outward. Almost as one, the gathered warriors sank to their knees. There was little other choice in the face of it. The storm of Fulgrim's love, the air cut by the knives of his fickle affections. Only the cacophony remained standing, priming their weapons. "Sons of the Third Legion, children of the Emperor, hear me. Your master calls. You have fought and bled for me, and I love each of you for your service, just as I cherish the service of your Lord Commander Primus." He paused as though mulling over Eidolon's full and self-given title before continuing. "He has struggled on your behalf, led boldly and bravely. He pleases me, just as your service has pleased him." Mischief danced in Fulgrim's dark eyes. Somehow, it did not matter that he was now a warp-swollen monster, a looming, many-armed serpent god. Fulgrim commanded their attention as readily as he had on the parade ground, or as they were poised to swear an oath of moment. "My son," Fulgrim murmured as he swithered forwards, arms reaching out in one motion to seize Eidolon, as though in some conspiratorial embrace. His sharply angled face slid next to Eidolon's, his lips at the Lord Commander Primus's ear. "This is the last time you disobey me. You have grown strong and proud, but next to me, you are still nothing." Fulgrim's hands clenched and caressed, some drifting across the plates of Eidolon's armor where others held him fiercely. With but a gesture, he could rip Eidolon limb from limb. "Try my patience again, and your great sacrifice will be in vain. Not even the Dark Prince will protect you from my wrath." Fulgrim pushed himself away and turned from Eidolon. Arms upraised, black lightning coursed along the veins of his outstretched limbs as he lifted skyward, haloed by violet flame. The Primarch's physical shell broke apart, becoming a rain of gold, a flutter of rose petals, a sudden rush of perfumed air. All eyes followed his ascent and dissolution. A moment of silence passed, in wonderful fragility. Eidolon allowed himself a moment of peace. He cast his eyes heavenward, through the pall of Fulgrim's ascent, far above, through the nest of tortured masonry and ruined catacombs. He could see the first hints of light.
"He is not wrong,"
Eidolon said at last. The others looked at him, still shell-shocked from the passage of the Primarch, trying in vain to tear their gaze from Fulgrim's wake.
"We have all suffered here, brothers. We have become the playthings of the warp rather than its masters. The gods are fickle, and so the Primarch has grown yet more fickle."
He laughed spittily, walking across the center of the chamber, surveying the warriors under his command. His warriors, his millennial, his legion. There was no shame now. The Primarch could not humble him. Whatever pain he had felt passed, washed away in the double-edged euphoria that came with Fulgrim's presence. There would only be terror after this. No more distractions or games, only the final test.
"We have been tested," but we have not been found wanting.
He went on, turning Gloria Eterna over and over again as he did so.
This wretched world burns. Our enemies are routed. Our superiority is undeniable. Others can claim their ascendancy, prostitute the name of their Primarch, hold rank over us as though it matters. We have proven them wrong.
He reached down and scooped up a handful of ashes.
There will come a time where we are free to indulge our desires, to carve our wants across a galaxy that belongs to the strong.
He let the detritus of the world, of its people, of the sons of Horus, drift through his fingers.
On that day, I shall lead us out, and not even the gods themselves shall cease our revels.
Cheers greeted his pronouncements. Eidolon grinned his slack grin.
Hail the Lord Commander Primus!
Vociferon called. Others took up the cry. Malachus whooped and jeered, his vigour temporarily surging. Plegua and the other cacophony resumed their song once more.
Come,
Eidolon said, as the others gathered around him, at last looking heavensward with fresh eyes, their souls soaring like the phoenix itself reborn.
We have a long road ahead of us.
My word, what a dramatic finish. The tension was palpable throughout that whole thing. Ever since the clapping, you knew something was up. And then we have the Fulgrim reveal, and it's just like, it's so good. I have to say, Fulgrim, really fun character in this. He's not in it much, just that final scene, but he was really fun to read. I mean, I don't know if you could tell, but I felt like I was having some fun with it. He's just so... This is the thing I love about The Emperor's Children, is that they're so funny. I don't know why. I find them to be like... I find them, especially the more corrupt ones, they're almost always just really funny to watch and, listen to. And I feel like Fulgrim is the embodiment of everything the Emperor's Children are, and it's just conveyed so well. He's so just... There's a bit of you that wants to punch him, but the rest of you just kind of wants to watch him do his thing and be entertained. He's just a little diva, and I'm so here for it. I might need to go and read more Fulgrim later. But Eidolon is... I wonder. This just makes me want to find out what Eidolon's doing in 40k. This makes me want to find out more about the current setting, what he's been up to. Is he in the Siege of Terror? Does anyone know? But God, I'm so glad I got this book. It was such a fun read from start to finish. I don't think there's a moment of it, a single chapter that dragged, where the pacing fell off. If I weren't recording this for this first read through here, I'd probably just binge this book in a day, because it's just, every time I had to stop because I was like, oh, I have to edit, I have to, find time to do stuff, I have to go to work. I was just like, I just want to come back and read it, because it was such a fun story. I'm really good. By the way, this is still, like, I have the limited edition copy. If you go back to the start of this playlist, you can see it. It's so pretty. Do yourself a favor. It's still in stock in the Warhammer web shop. Go treat yourself. It's so good. It's such a gorgeous book. I really need to do an Emperor's Children Space Marine in the lavender, like in the lavender and silver of this book. I think my plan was actually to do my Master of Executions, which I've based on Toricon from the Adored and Lord of Excess, in this kind of color. Not quite got it right though. It's a bit darker than I thought it would be. So I'm not sure. Well, we'll see. I'll figure something out. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that, do support the official release. I should probably have put this in all my videos, but yeah, support the official release. Get the audiobook. In the description, I'll put a link to the web shop for both the limited edition version that I've got here and just the regular version. But yeah, let me know if there's anything I can do better for next time. The next book, we're going to take a little bit of a break from book reading just because I want to get some painting videos done on the channel. I want to do some Kill Team stuff. If you've been watching streams and might have noticed a couple of videos on it, I've by the time this video goes out, and by the time you get here, I should have finished my Emperor's Children Kill Team, which is just the Legionaries Kill Team, but I kit bashed them a bit and made them look a bit more Emperor's Children. I hope you'll like those. You should check them out. I'll probably put them in a post on YouTube. But yeah. Anyway, I love you all. Please do let me know. The next book is going to be it's going to be the first Caiaphas Cain book from the Hero of the Imperium Omnibus, because that's what my Discord voted for. This was actually an option, but Discord didn't vote for this. I wanted to read this, so I kind of like said, I love democracy. I'm going to ignore democracy and read what I want to read. Because I'm the content creator, damn it. But I will read Caiaphas Cain, because, like, I have the book, and, you know, it's just here. And I want to read it anyway, but I was super hyped for this. I also need to read Lazarus Enmity's Edge at some point. I don't think anyone's really spoken about that book. I don't think anyone really cares who Lazarus is, but I would like some new Dark Angels lore. That isn't the Lion, Son of the Forest, and the Codex stuff. But yeah, anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this whole book. If you haven't, if this is for some reason the first video of the series you're watching, go to my channel. There's a playlist from start to finish. This book, I read the whole thing. It's a good time. At least I think it's a good time. Maybe it's not a good time. Maybe it's not for you, but maybe I'm not for you. I hope I am for you. I mean, what? Sorry, I'm just rambling now. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, do all the social media stuff. Find me on socials, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Threads and Instagram and Twitch. I stream like 3 or 4 days a week during the week when I come home, when I have days off work. Wow. Anyway, bye. Mwah.